This is Distant Replay, the podcast that goes back in time to relive all the greatest events that we witnessed in sports. From upsets, to championships, to cultural moments, we discuss it all. Coming up on today's episode.
Third down and 17. Using Parker in motion, and Butler takes him. They'll look for Parker on a quick hit. Touchback, 10, 5, end zone out of bounds. Touchdown, got it, touchdown. The Aggies upset Kansas State.
Well, we're going back to a conference championship game, the Big 12 conference championship game. This was just the third one ever in 1998. The day was December 5th, 1998, and it was a matchup between Kansas State, an undefeated Kansas State Wildcats team, and a Texas A&M team that was also in the top 10. A lot at stake for this ball game, and it turned out to be a classic. Welcome into Distant Replay. I'm Ben George. He is Mike Noto. And Mike, we go back to the 90s again for a little college football. This is early on in the conference championship era of college football, and it was fun to go back to this period.
Yeah, back then, these games were like everything because, like you said, it was new. And especially when you had the BCS ramifications like this game had. And on top of it, you had two teams that normally are really not in the mix at this level, right? Kansas State and Texas A&M. So all that combined made this game must-watch back in 1998.
So we're going to go through it all. We're going to remind you of the BCS standings. It was a great finish again. Man, I mean, say what you will about the BCS, but it was always drama-filled come the final couple of weeks of the season. This year was no different. So we'll take you through those standings. Head coach-wise, some great coaches in this game, some good players as well that maybe we don't realize what positions they were playing back at the time. We'll take you through that, and then we'll go through the game as well, some outdated stuff, a couple what-ifs for the show as well. You can watch this game in its entirety, distantreplaypodcast.com. We'll put it up on the website. You can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. The show will be archived on YouTube as well. So this game, again, December 5th, 98, inside the Trans World Dome in St. Louis, Missouri. And I'll just start even by saying I had forgotten that they even played the Big 12 championship at all in St. Louis.
When I think of the Big 12 championship, for some reason, I think of that Darren Sproles Kansas State game a little bit later where they played at Arrowhead Stadium when it was freezing. Do you remember that game?
Yeah.
I forgot they played in St. Louis also, but this is a heck of a little run here for the Trans World Dome because they hosted this game, and this was also when we're starting with the greatest show on turf as well.
Yeah, a lot going on late 90s around this time in the Trans World Dome. But
and St. Louis as a whole, right? You have McGuire.
Yeah.
You have, you have the Rams and you have the Trans World Dome.
Yeah, busy time in St. Louis, and that's kind of where we are for this one. So a couple things I want to get into first. Let's talk BCS standings because that's, really what the implications were for this ball game. I mean, it was a great conference championship game and, fun to go back through, but you got to talk about the conference or the BCS standings when you talk about this game. So kind of where we are going into the championship weekend, and that's why the championship weekend was so great. It's still good, but I don't think it's as good as it was back when only two teams got in, and it was a little bit more parity in college football. But you had Tennessee, number one. You had UCLA, number two. Both those teams were undefeated. Then you had Kansas State, who was an undefeated Big 12 team, the team that was kind of on the outside looking in at this point. This is kind of the scenario why we went to an expanded 4-team playoff to get a team like this in. But then you had Florida State behind them, Ohio State. So all these teams were in the mix, and that was the big storyline because you already had the Pac-12 going on at the same time as this Kansas State game was, and it became a storyline during this game.
Yeah, and if you look at which one of these teams is not like the other, you would say Kansas State, right?
Yeah.
Because you have four powers, Tennessee, UCLA, Florida State, and Ohio State, and Kansas State, who sort of thought of that team heading into this game that maybe is not getting their due credit, for going undefeated in a major conference. Remember, this is the Tennessee team the year after Peyton Manning left for the pros, right? So this is the T. Martin. This is the T. Martin version of Tennessee football.
T. Martin, Peerless Price. I know you loved him. That was a good Tennessee team, obviously. But that's what the rankings were. And as we get into this game in a minute, that becomes part of the storyline for Musburgers. He's talking about the updating the score in the other game because it's going on ahead of this game, so we get the outcome while this is happening. But Kansas State essentially is in a position where they need to win. I mean, obviously, but they probably need to win in a fairly convincing fashion. I mean, they're playing a top 10 team, so that's already going to be a little bit of a boost because UCLA was playing a Miami team that was unranked that day. So you kind of think, okay, Kansas State's in a little bit better position, but there was still that element of you need the margin of victory was still in play here. So that became part of this game as well.
Yeah, you forget back in the day how much that margin of victory was, not only how important it was, but how much it was talked about during games. It's something they brought up several times during this game. And that's something that, remember back in the day, people felt Florida State used to always get like extra points for that because they used to crush teams. Do you remember that being an issue?
Yeah.
But yeah, that margin of victory, always a big thing in these games during the BCS era.
And this Kansas State team, look, there's a reason why they weren't in the top 2. I mean, you look at their schedule, okay? Kansas State played a very, very easy schedule for the majority of the slate. They opened up with Indiana State, Northern Illinois, a Texas team that was, obviously not great. They weren't ranked that year, but they weren't bad. Northeast Louisiana, okay? So they ran off their first 4 games, Mike, 66-0, 73-7, 48-7, and 62-7. They had a lot of games. They were only in a couple close games all season, and those were at the end of the year against number 11 Nebraska and then number 19 Missouri. Outside of that, I mean, this team was pretty dominant.
Yeah, you know what this team reminded me of with their early season sort of trouncing everyone? Do you remember that year when Geno Smith was on West Virginia? And the first 5 or 6 games, they kind of came out of nowhere and crushed everyone and got on the national landscape.
Right.
Well, the difference with this team is they kept on winning, right?
Yeah.
So normally those teams that start off well out of nowhere, that play a light schedule, they kind of fall by the wayside. But Kansas State did not. I mean, they were in it from the beginning of the season up until this point.
And you look at the roster of this team, it's Michael Bishop. I mean, I think if you say, okay, hey, we're going to go back and watch an old Kansas State game, you're probably going to either say, was that the Darren Sproles team or was that the Michael Bishop team? And this was the Bishop team, the senior quarterback, kind of an all-do-everything quarterback. And, if it wasn't for Ricky Williams being the all-everything guy this year in college football, and eventually who Ditka gave away everything for in the pros, Bishop has a legit chance to win the Heisman this year.
Yeah, you have 2 Big 12 players, the top 2 in the Heisman voting. And Bishop was kind of a guy, when you look at his numbers, they're not eye-popping, but a guy who had such a big influence on every single play for Kansas State. You see that with these dual-threat quarterbacks back in the day. The stats are not as eye-popping as they are these days, but when you remember and look back, their impact on the game, I think, was just as big. They just did it in different ways.
Yeah, his stats that year, almost 3,000 yards passing, 23 TDs, 5 interceptions, and was second on the team in rushing, finished up with about 750 rushing yards for the year. But you saw that with him all season, and you saw that in this game. The dual threat, can throw, has a great arm, but can also run the ball. Also in that lineup, Mike, I mean, who else stood out to you? Because, I mean, obviously Bishop's going to be number 1 on that list, but what other players, when you look down and when we got the starting lineups when the game started, who else kind of brought you back?
All right, so Mark Simino, linebacker. I remembered him.
Yeah.
Aaron Lockett, who was the brother of Kevin Lockett and the uncle of Tyler Lockett. All 3 Locketts played at Kansas State. So that's kind of another name, along with Sproles and along with Michael Bishop. The Lockett name is sort of a name that you think of Kansas State football. Mm-hmm. And then last but certainly not least is your boy, Martin Gramatica. Automatica, such a great nickname. And we'll get to Musburger here in a second, but just not to bury the lead here, his affection for Martin Gramatica was very apparent during the broadcast, to say the least.
No question. It took you back. I mean, listen, as we get into this game, I mean, you're reminded how good Gramatica was that year, and we laugh about it because, of what happened in his pro career, and we kind of joke about, the antics from a kicker of all things, but that dude could kick the ball, and he was dang good, and a big part of their success, I think, this year. And it was fun. It's fun going back to that. And don't forget about Darnell McDonald, leading receiver for this team. You don't think about him a whole lot. He's a 7th-round pick, but 75 receptions, over 1,000 yards, and a big target.
Yeah, and you bring up Gramatica for people who may not know him. Again, I say this every episode, but if you're listening to a Kansas State podcast and you don't know Martin Gramatica, I find that a little strange. But nonetheless, if you don't know who he is, he was a kicker who had a little bit of flair to him, and he was a weapon. Like, he was a legit weapon sort of like a Justin Tucker is now for the Ravens, you know? He made a difference. And then you mentioned McDonald. He's another one of these guys. It seems like there's one every game where you look at his height, his weight, his speed, his ability that he showed in this game, and it's a wonder you didn't hear more from him at the pro level.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. You watch him play, and he's kind of a different level in this game and throughout his career. So that's Kansas State team again, and we'll get to coaches in a second. So let's flip over to Texas A&M, and A&M comes in. You know, the Aggies. This is one of their better football teams. They just came in off a loss to Texas, which obviously was a huge defeat because Texas not ranked, as already mentioned, that year. That game was in Austin, big rivalry game that I definitely miss at this point. But it was a one-possession game, a 2-point finish, just a dramatic, heartbreaking loss. But they still make it in to the Big 12 Championship game, and they're still ranked 10th in the country. So they have a really good team. But you look at their season, Mike, and I hadn't gone back through it until looking at this game because you don't really think much about the 99 or 98 A&M Aggies, whatever. But they lost. They played number 2 Florida State, okay, to open up the season. Lost that game by 9 in Jersey, the kickoff classic. So already a team that you know how it turns out, very good. They had Nebraska, number 2 Nebraska, who they beat. They beat a ranked Texas Tech. They beat a ranked Missouri until they fell to Texas. I mean, this team could have been really special this year.
Man, the kickoff classic at the Meadowlands, man, you're bringing me back. I forgot all about that game. Where they would play with the old school red Meadowlands logo in the middle with the state of New Jersey there.
Yeah.
I've actually gone to that game back in the day.
Oh, really? Nice.
That's fun. Yeah. Because it was one of the only good, college football games, if you lived around New York, it was one of the only good ones to go to.
Yeah.
But yeah, so this Texas A&M team, a lot better than I remember. At first I thought maybe they were one of these teams that, snuck into the championship game because maybe the conference had a down year, but that wasn't the case. They were legitimately a good team, and they had a good roster also.
Yeah, so the big story for A&M coming into this game, I mean, obviously you lost to Texas, and that was kind of a big part of it, but they come in, and Randy McCown had gotten hurt. Their starting quarterback had gotten hurt against Texas. Ended up he broke his shoulder.
Collarbone, I think.
Collarbone, yeah. And he didn't even realize it until a couple days later in practice when he was throwing and it hurt. How Texas, how A&M is that?
Football guy.
Definite football guy. So that opened the door for Brandon Stewart to come in and play quarterback, the backup. But what made this even more interesting, Stewart obviously not, he's a guy I think that had played at Tennessee, but transferred out because of Peyton Manning, and now he has a shot here for A&M. But the backup, because Brandon Stewart was now the quarterback, the backup for A&M, Shane Leckler was the backup quarterback.
Yeah, and there was even a point in this game we'll get to where you legitimately thought Shane Leckler was going to have to go in the game and be a quarterback, which I thought was going to happen there for a second.
I did too.
Yeah, Shane Leckler obviously ended up being an all-world punter in the pros as well, so for the Raiders. So I think his name if you follow the NFL.
Yeah,
and there were some other notable names on this roster as well.
Yeah, let's start Dante Hall. I mean, let's not bury the lead, as you say. Dante Hall, okay. So I think when we think Dante Hall, you automatically think dynamic punt returner. Early mid-2000s was kind of like the guy in the NFL. Like, hey, when he touches the ball, you want to watch him play. But did you remember that he was a running back, exclusively for A&M?
All right, so Dante Hall. First of all, the nickname, the human joystick. Great nickname. One of the all-time best. I legitimately thought Dante Hall was made in a lab somewhere, and he showed up wearing a Kansas City Chiefs uniform one day on my TV. I had no recollection of him even playing college football. Never mind being number 34 and being the every down running back for Texas A&M and being a good running back.
Yeah.
Not very good around the goal line, as we'll get to, but a very good running back. And I had to look it up and make sure it was the same Dante Hall.
I'm going to have some thoughts on Dante Hall as we go through this game, but I was also surprised that he was at running back and really not anywhere else in this roster or playing any other positions. I was kind of surprised by that, but he was backed up by or also shared carries with Jamar Toombs and Sirr Parker, a great name.
Sirr with 2 R's, by the way, if you're keeping score at home. And yeah, he's a guy, if you remember this game, he's the name you remember before you even start watching. Is that fair to say?
I'd go defense probably for me. That win was like the guy, and I think A&M, especially when I think defense, he's the guy that I think about in this era, mid-90s to mid-2000s. He's that guy.
Yeah, he's like cookie cutter 1990s linebacker, like, athletic, big pads, in on every play. It seemed like the kind of guy that the announcers absolutely loved and fawned over. It was just he was a really good player, and not that I forgot, but this really, really reminded me watching him in this game.
Yeah, he was that guy for me, and he had a pretty good pro career, but he was in all everything in college. I mean, the guy was all over the field and had a huge game in this one as well, as we'll get to. So that's A&M. The Aggies, they come in with a very good 10-2 record in this game, and they were a very good team. That, I mean, God, when you think back, I mean, this is maybe one of their best teams. Man, I would say maybe in the last 40 years or so. I mean, I have to go back through their history of their program, but I mean, this was one of their best. That could have been really special if some breaks may have gone their way. But the coaches for these two teams, another great era for A&M, R.C. Slocum, who I think he's the guy that I think all A&M fans kind of appreciate, especially now, because he was eventually kind of out the door a few years after this, but this guy had an amazing run at A&M.
Yeah, so the name Slocum had to come back. The last name in this era of the 90s, you had R.C. Slocum, and you had relief pitcher Heathcliff Slocum. So they spelled their names differently, but the last name Slocum around a lot during this time period. And R.C. Slocum was one of these just steady, good college coaches. I mean, he's when I think of Texas A&M, from the time I've been watching college football, he's the guy I think of as coach for Texas A&M.
Yeah, he took over in '89. Very good. I mean, he spent a lot of time as an assistant there, worked his way up at DC there, a couple different stints there before taking over. And, he had a really good run going with his A&M team right now, and had him in position here to pull the upset. And then on the other side, Kansas State, Mike, who's the Kansas State coach? If you could name, I don't even know if anybody can name more than one Kansas State coach, to be honest with you. And it's this guy, Bill Snyder.
Yeah, we always talk about the guy, right? Like, who's the guy? For Kansas State football, the guy is and always will be Bill Snyder. There was no Kansas State football to speak of before Bill Snyder. This is an eye-popping stat. He won as many games in 10 years as the program did in the previous 30 years.
It's amazing.
That's all you really need. That's all you really need to know about Bill Snyder. That and the fact that they named the stadium after him, didn't they?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
I think it's like Snyder Family Stadium. So there you go. That stat, and they don't name stadiums after people who are non-consequential. So he is the guy for Kansas State football, and he was a real serious guy. I mean, you could tell this in his interviews during this game, and he got the most out of his players. I mean, he didn't have a roster with 3, 4 and 5-star recruits for the most part, and he got the most out of these guys in this era, and they were a legit force to be reckoned with during this time period.
They had played one bowl game in the school history before he took over in '89. They lost the Independence Bowl in '82, which was their only winning season from 1971 until he took over, okay? One winning season. But he had a rough start, but in just a few years, he had going to the bowl games every year. And when you come into '98, they were just off appearances in the Cotton and the Fiesta. So this team is like playing at a high level, and they're becoming like a household name and in one of those elite programs in college football year in, year out. They're going to be there in the Big 12, and that's what they were this year. In '98, he had it all rolling. I mean, he had one loss the previous year, '97, so they came in with high expectations. But Snyder, man, just a really, really good coach, so much so that they had to bring him back again later on after he had left. But those two coaches, I mean, obviously A&M, they have more history. You got Bear Bryant, you got Gene Stallings. But I think in the last 30 years, Slocum's that guy that you think of, and then obviously Bill Snyder. So two powerhouse coaches in this game. Anything else pregame, Mike, before we jump into this one?
No, just the ABC college football intro music from this era, I think, is very underrated.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And
ABC.
how I judge that is if I played it for people right now that are college football fans, you would recognize it right away.
Yeah, I do miss the ABC games because you had Brent Musburger on the call with Dan Fouts and Jack Arute on the sideline. I mean, this is a crew that we loved back in the day.
Yeah, Musburger was great in this game. I mean, I know he's usually great when we do these games, but even just next level with this game. Fouts is a good compliment to Musburger because I think Musburger finds Fouts legitimately funny. So a lot of times you get some laughter and some jokes going on. And Jacker Root, I don't know if I never noticed about him before, but he gets right in there and asks some pretty personal questions, doesn't he?
I don't remember him being that aggressive either. I mean, he got after it in this game. He did a great job. But yeah, I was thinking the same thing. Like, most sideline stuff now is pretty scripted. You'll have a report or two. You're going to have your coach leading going to halftime and maybe coach trailing coming back and the winning coach after the game. Like all pretty, I say easy interviews, relatively speaking, for these reporters. But yeah, Root got after it in this game, and we'll talk about that some as we go on. And I agree with Musburger. I think Musburger had a great game, and dude, he was fired up for this game from the jump. I mean, you could tell like he was always fun to listen to, but it seemed like he had an extra level or an extra gear in this game.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
So let's get into it. This game, an afternoon time slot. This was like the in-between on the championship Saturday. In between, you had the Pac-12, I guess it wasn't championship, it was UCLA playing Miami earlier on. And then you had the SEC championship coming in behind them. All those games made a big difference in the BCS standings. So let's give our thoughts on each quarter, Mike, and kind of go through this. Obviously, this game picks up as we move along. But early on in this game, some thoughts from the first quarter. I'll start. To me, both teams easing into it. Turnover, first turnover of the game midway through the first quarter. Kansas State's tight end loses it on their first drive deep into A&M territory. But this guy, was it Swift? He ended up being a big part of this game plan for them, even though this mistake early on for him.
Yeah, Swift he's one of these human beings who's just so big, it's like eye-popping. When you look that big, I don't know if it was his pads or he was just a big guy. He was a big dude. He moved well, and he was a huge part of this game for Kansas State. And, early on, my thoughts in the game, Ben, were these two teams were a lot more athletic than I remember, and how simple the Kansas State offense is. It's simple, but it works. It's very effective.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think part of the athleticism, the appearance, to me, I always think like these guys their jerseys were bigger, as we've talked about. Shoulder pads were huge. So like even guys that were probably pretty normal size wide receivers looked like bulkier and wider and just like maybe stouter than normal. I don't know if you see it the same way, but that's like you saw a couple pass catchers in this game. Like, man, those guys look like they're big and they'd be lumbering down the field, but they're actually pretty athletic.
Yeah, you're right. Maybe it is the optics of it. That's a good point.
So you had that turnover. Then the very next play, a flea flicker, Stewart gets hit on a pass and gets intercepted. So you had back-to-back turnovers on that play, and it ultimately results in a Martin Automatica Gramatica field goal to make it 3-0. And you already see, first field goal, you got the celebration, Mike. He's jumping up, the holder's holding him up above his head, like classic Gramatica.
Dude, this is vintage Automatica here. Kicks a field goal, not really a tough field goal to hit, but, he's a weapon. And he's going to live it up. That's just how Martin rolled. And Kansas State's up 3-0. And then the next big thing that happened in this game, Benny, was the quarterback for Texas A&M getting hurt.
Yeah, he gets hit and looks like he kind of tweaked his knee a little bit. The way maybe it was Dante Hall that fell back on him. So Stewart is like down in the end zone. Like it looks like he can't get up. Like he tries to get up and falls, and it looks pretty serious at this point. And granted, he's 0 for 5 passing so far. So it's not like he's made a big impact, but you think if he goes out, Shane Leckler's the backup. And they had already kind of alluded to this at the beginning of the game. And they come back from break, and, dude, you see, like, Leckler's, like, warming up. I mean, he's got, like, his headset on, talking to the offensive coordinator. He's like, getting geared up to come in and take over at quarterback. And I was thinking, because I don't remember this game, like, the details, I actually thought he was going to come in because the injury looked like it was significant enough where Stewart would at least miss the series. And I was like, holy cow, we're about to actually see a punter take over in a championship game at quarterback.
Yeah, I think what helped that, Ben, was the fact that the next drive for Kansas State was actually a pretty long drive. But Stewart, I mean, that looked like a really serious injury, like you mentioned. And it was just funny seeing Leckler, seeing someone was a punter warming up on the sideline like they're going to enter the game as a quarterback. And like we talked about before, you have in your mind, like, is this really going to happen?
Yeah.
And at this point, Kansas State has absolutely all the momentum.
Yeah, that big drive by Kansas State, they Swift actually capitalizes on this and redeems himself quickly from that fumble earlier. 16-yard reception. K-State goes up 10-0. And, this is This is exactly what you thought. And there's a ton of Kansas State fans, which not a surprise with the big of a game this is in St. Louis. Like they're there showing up, and it feels like this is a celebration. We're kind of tracking that UCLA score right now. We're living it up. This is a great time to be a Wildcat.
Oh, hey, look, we do games like this every once in a while, Ben, where this is the moment for a Kansas State football fan. We went through how bad they had been, for 30 years prior to Bill Snyder arriving. You're winning 10-0. The other quarterback is hurt. Michael Bishop is running and throwing and being effective. Doesn't get any better than that.
Yeah, what could go wrong, right?
Yeah.
So as I mentioned, you had A&M coming back, running the ball effectively. With Stewart coming back banged up, they just were like, hey, let's let Dante Hall work, which should have been more of the game plan. I mean, in retrospect now, he was so athletic, and they compared him to Barry Sanders, I think, during this game, which I think was a fair comparison at running back. And they're going to put a drive together heading into the second quarter, and A&M actually gets down to the 3-yard line, and it's now 4th and goal. And I thought maybe they'd go for it here, Mike. They just kind of showed a formation and tried to draw the defense offside. Because at first I was like, wow, they're going to go for it here. I thought Slocum would be a little more conservative in his play calling, and then I saw them actually just take the delay of game, move it back, and I was like, okay, that makes more sense. But, you kind of felt like, hey, you maybe need to be a little more aggressive because this Kansas State team can score.
Yeah, but you know what, Ben? In the moment, I wondered why he didn't go for it. But then as the game went on, I mean, specifically Dante Hall was so bad in those short down and distance situations.
Yeah,
that maybe it's a case of him knowing his team a little bit better than we did. And you know how these coaches think, especially back in 1998. You want to get points on the board. When you're talking about when you don't have any points, you want to get points on the board to get the ball rolling. I think that was probably the thinking.
It's a completely different mentality than.
Oh yeah,
we're talking, 15
no analytics
years later. No.
Yeah.
No. And it's like, hey, yeah, it's old school, like football guy mentality. Let's just get our points and move on. They did that. It was 10-3 after the field goal, 11 minutes left. But K-State answers again. 2 quick plays. Bishop hits Darnell McDonald, as we mentioned, just really a dynamic receiver, tall, big, strong, fast, long touchdown, makes it 17-3. And as they're scoring this touchdown, we get the update to say, and remember, this is back, no cell phones, right? You're relying on that ticker. If you ever went to a game back in the 90s, they had maybe one scoreboard that had the rotating scores that you could never catch the one you wanted to unless you stared at it for 20, 30 seconds at a time. Well, they finally got the update. The score, the UCLA game pops up where Miami had actually upset UCLA, and it is a madhouse in the Trans World Dome.
Oh, for sure. I mean, look, Bishop hasn't thrown an incompletion yet. He has 130 yards, 2 touchdowns. They're up 17-3. This flashes on the scoreboard that Miami has beaten UCLA. So now these fans know, hey, if we win, we're going to the BCS National Championship Game. And those scoreboards in the stadiums, Ben, I can't believe you just mentioned those. Those were growing up going to Jets games where that's how you would find out, the out-of-town scores. It was so funny where someone would be like, oh, Buffalo's losing. Buffalo's losing? Yeah, look on the scoreboard. Oh, it switched. Who are they playing? It'd be like a whole conversation with the out-of-town scoreboard. That's funny.
You'd have no idea what was going on in that game. You just could see the score, and that was literally it.
No context. You know those Twitter accounts, no context?
Yeah.
That's how there's no highlights, no nothing. It could have been wrong for all you knew.
Exactly. You just trusted it. And sometimes it wouldn't be updated for 15 or 20 minutes at a time, even if there were scores. But so 17-3, all momentum Kansas State's favor. A&M puts a nice drive together. They kind of answer the bell a little bit, get the ball down. But again, they settle for a field goal. Not a great red zone offense with this team. And kind of to your point, Mike, Dante Hall, and then their play calling wasn't effective in the red zone, and it kind of hurt them early on. But a 17-6 now. They get some points on the board. Just a few minutes left, and now Kansas State has an opportunity here to maybe put together one last drive. And anytime they have the ball late in a half or a game, all eyes are on Gramatica. It's we have the field goal line now that comes across the field. Hey, get to this point, and you're in your field goal range. That's what they're thinking with this guy. It's get across the 50. And you have a chance, because there was so much hype around this guy. Even during the broadcast, they're talking about how Bill Snyder said he kicked a 70-something yarder in practice.
The 73-yarder. Oh, no way. You see this with these games back in the day, the focus on the punter, the kicker, the good offensive tackle. That's what you don't get these days. These players are largely forgotten about. They're never the focus of the broadcast.
No, and Gramatica was. Automatica and Musburger cherished him. But he came out. They actually got into a position to attempt a 59-yarder in the half. 59-yarder. And, that's obviously very rare in college football. But it looked like he had the leg. Now, the camera was kind of high. He sliced it a little bit. It missed to the right. But it looked like it had a chance. And now, granted, too, A&M took all three timeouts, right, to ice him.
Yeah, you can't ice Gramatica.
And
he may miss a kick, but you're not getting to this guy mentally.
It's a 59-yarder, and you're worried about icing the kicker.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay? That's all you need to know about Automatica. But he did miss it, so we end 17-6. And again, it's Kansas State's ball game to lose right now. Third quarter, we see my boy that win making a play early on. He intercepts Bishop. And listen, Bishop had a really good game, but Mike, he made some critical mistakes in this game. It seemed like the only mistakes he made ended up being huge plays in the game.
Yeah, it was to the point where I don't want to say I ever feel bad for a guy like Bishop and the mistakes he made, but they got to this point because Bishop played a certain way, right? The guy was second in the Heisman voting, and you cringe when you see players at that are that good make such big mistakes when you know what the stakes are. I don't know if you found yourself sort of feeling that way when you were watching this, but I did, and this was one of those moments when Datwin intercepted him.
Yeah, and it was a big play for A&M to kind of get him going here, and so A&M ball back. They put a good drive together. They get all the way down again. It's kind of start to stall out again in the red zone. They got a 4th and goal situation. This time just inches out, and they decide to go for it. Toombs punches it in, and then they go for 2, Mike.
Yeah, they went for a 2-point conversion, which failed. And look, this is after Texas A&M. I mean, for them to punch this in for a touchdown is like a big deal moment in the game because their other 2 drives stalled, like Ben talked about earlier, and they had to settle for field goals because they're running the ball on Texas A&M. By this point, Dante Hall has over 100 yards. Sirr Parker's doing his thing when he has chances. So kind of a big thing even though they failed the 2-point conversion, sort of big for them to punch it in from a momentum standpoint.
Yeah, and it was kind of a big kind of set of calls here because they called a false start on A&M when it should have probably been an offsides on the Kansas State defensive lineman who jumped and forced the offensive line to move, but they didn't see it that way. And then the next play was a play they got tackled on the 1-yard line. So the conversion failed by a yard, but they were hit by that penalty that kind of hurt them. So it's 17-12, under 9 minutes to go in the quarter. And again, this is one of those games we go back and watch, and we're like, okay, Kansas State's doing everything they need to. I mean, yeah, A&M's answering a little bit here, but their offense hasn't been moving the ball that well. They tried to go for 2 here, and it fell. It's like, Kansas State's making the plays they need to at this point. But we're like, okay, something's got to happen here. I thought it was interesting. There was a report during this third quarter, Mike, from Jack Root, that Bishop had been clocked throwing the ball 80 miles per hour, the football. I don't know that. Have we ever really talked about quarterbacks being clocked at that, how fast they throw the football?
The only other guy I ever remember them making a big deal about how hard they threw the ball were Favre and Elway, but I never remember a mile per hour being put to that.
No.
Especially because in football, sometimes it's not good to throw the ball as hard as you can.
And I think that kind of hurt him here in this game. He was a good quarterback, but there were some throws that were just fired in there, made it tough on his receivers. But I thought that was an interesting report because I don't really remember talking about quarterbacks in the sense of how fast they threw the football, but they did here. Gramatica nailed a 45-yarder. The guy was clutch. And I'm still making note every time Gramatica comes on that Musburger gets so excited to see him come out there. He loves talking about him.
He does. It just is a major theme of the game. That and them plugging Dr. Pepper incessantly. Dr. Pepper was mentioned as the title sponsor for this game. Their logo is all over the field, and Musburger and Fouts are mentioning them. I would probably say, I'm not exaggerating, they mentioned them 10 times throughout the game. Even
there was even a point where he was telling a story of one of the players, I think on Kansas State, whose dad was a delivery driver for Pepsi. Did you hear that one?
No.
And Musburger was like, I know that Dr. Pepper is our sponsor, but this guy was a Pepsi driver. He even kind of pointed it out there and apologized to Dr. Pepper when telling that story. But it's 20-12 after Gramatica hits that. We see Stewart start to kind of get it together here in the third quarter. He has not been good at all. What do you have, 2 completions in the first half, Mike, of this game? And not only did he have 2 completions, his throws weren't that great. The misses he had were fairly bad misses, but he's starting to get it together, and it's kind of started by this huge 3rd and long conversion he hits to Chris Taylor, who starts to become their kind of go-to receiver. And a guy that's wearing 42, one of these guys that I kind of mentioned earlier, like doesn't look like he'd be a very good receiver. This guy was pretty good.
Yeah. It's one of those guys, like there's a lot of guys in these games we do. Remember there was we did a game with Chris Doring. Remember Chris Doring from Florida? Yeah. Kind of like the same kind of guy. We did the Nebraska-Florida game from back in the day. This guy just kind of emerges, and you're like, oh, okay. Like I didn't see this coming. But, yeah, like you're saying, he became kind of a go-to guy here.
But, unfortunately, we had a fumble a couple of plays later in midfield. You give the ball right back to Bishop. And, listen, they do the job. Bishop leads him down the field, throwing and running, showing off the kind of the skill that he has shown all year, and finishes off the drive with a touchdown. It's 27-12. And at this point, like, you look at this game, and it's exactly what you expected. Bishop has lived up to the hype. I mean, his numbers look great. Then you got Brandon Stewart, has 4 completions at this point, and we're late in the third quarter. I mean, at some point, I'm like, man, how is A&M even in this ball game?
Exactly. And you're waiting for, like, hey, what's going to change here to make this comeback happen? Because, like you said, Kansas State takes a 27-12 lead here on the Bishop touchdown run after the Texas A&M turnover. And then to begin the fourth quarter, Texas A&M has a quick 3-and-out, and Kansas State gets the ball right back.
Yeah, and I mean, it's everything. This is one of those games that I'm hard to believe as I'm watching. Like, how do they lose this game? And Kansas State, I mean, they're playing better. They're in a better situation. They have the momentum. I don't know if it's a pressure thing that leads to these kind of things, Mike. But again, this is one that very surprised me with the way this game played out. Fourth quarter, we move to the fourth quarter again, 27-12. Begins with a sack of Stewart. Pushes them back to their own 13. Okay, A&M's forced a punt. So Kansas State's taking the ball over at their own 44. Own 44, 27-12 at this point, and they have a really good kicker. We know this. They only have to get about 15, 20 yards on this drive. I feel like if they get any points here on this drive to start the fourth quarter, this ball game.
Yeah, because when it's 27-12 and we're watching it now with the benefit of hindsight, I'm thinking to myself, man, Texas A&M has to really thread a needle here to get back in this game. Like you said, they kick the field goal. Now we make that an 18-point lead, and it's a lot more to overcome, needing the 3 possessions. But that didn't turn out that way.
Kansas State goes 3-and-out. A&M at this point, we see a graphic, has 49 yards of offense in the half. Okay, it has no sense the comeback's coming here, but it's like the light switch just flips. A&M goes 78 yards in 10 plays. It took less than 3 minutes. I don't know if you even thought about this at all, Mike, but the touchdown pass is one of those where kind of the inside receiver goes towards the outside, kind of a flag pattern. The outside guy cuts in like a post or slant, and I couldn't tell if Stewart was trying to throw to the inside guy, the slant, and just overthrew him, and the guy happened to be behind him and caught it. Because it looked like Taylor was going up to try to catch the ball. Did you have a thought on that at all?
Fair point. I couldn't tell either. But you know what this play did, Ben? It's very, very good to point that out because I thought the same thing. I have that in my notes. But this got Stewart going big time.
Oh, yeah.
From here on out, Stewart, who we've been critical of to this point, he's the difference in this fourth quarter. Make no mistake about it. He stepped it up big time, starting with this drive.
It's night and day too. He had not been playing well, and he just turns it on. It was pretty crazy the way to kind of watch this game unfold. They stop Kansas State. A&M takes it over again. This time again at their own 10 with 6 minutes left. But it just seemed like A&M was doing everything right. A couple of big passes, a pass interference call, and they're back in the red zone again all of a sudden. And this is a one-score game. But the defense stands up for K-State, and it felt like at this minute, okay, A&M just took their last shot, and Kansas State took the last big punch from A&M. They get into the 4th and 17. We're under 4 minutes here. They deflect the pass, turn it over on downs. We're under 4 minutes. Like, Kansas State did the job.
Yeah, not only – so Kansas State gets the ball back after forcing a turnover on downs, like you mentioned. With 3:27 left, they're up 8, 27-19, and most importantly, Texas A&M only has 1 timeout left.
Yep, that's it.
So that's why the feeling you just said is what I got too. I'm like, oh man, that was a nice last gasp by Texas A&M, but we know something else is coming here, and we get it here on Kansas State's next drive.
It's a baffling set of calls. They run the first play. Okay, we expect that. Second down, they have Michael Bishop dropping back, and he's like scrambling in the pocket with the ball loose, like kind of running around with it just kind of out there. Almost takes his sack, but he throws it downfield. And it was almost a completion, but so much could have gone wrong in that play. And then on top of that, they stopped the clock. And you're going, wait, what are they doing?
Second and 6, by the way. It's a second and 6. It's not like it's second and 14.
And you don't need any. You don't need points. You don't need a big play. But they did point out, I thought it was interesting, like Kansas State keeping their foot down. They want to make an impression with this victory if they can pull it out. And I don't know if that weighed into the thinking there on the play calling. But
I sure hope not.
I'm just going, man, why would you throw there? I mean, Bishop is being effective. You can move the football. Why do that? And then on third down, and now it's 3rd and 6. Bishop does take off and run. Seems to get the first down, but a fumble. He gets hit, loses the ball, and A&M is there to recover. So all of a sudden, only a minute's come off the clock. A&M has the ball back at the 35, and just an incredible sequence of plays here, Mike.
Look, I go back to that 2nd and 6. You have 2 downs to get 6 yards. You have the best dual threat quarterback in the sport. Why not roll him out, give him a couple options to pass to, and let him run? You can't tell me he can't get at least 3 yards of carry on 2nd and 3rd down. Why he was even put in this situation here is mind-boggling. And after this fumble, we just went over, Michael Bishop is very upset on the sidelines.
Yeah.
I can't remember a player of his magnitude being this visibly upset on the sideline after making a bad play.
Yeah, Mushburger even points out, like, he walks all the way down the sideline away from his teammates, and it makes a point to call that out. Yeah, that was very interesting to see. These next 2 plays were crazy to me in this game. So A&M's got the ball up to 35, right? 35 yards away from going in here, having a chance to tie this game up. They get an offensive pass interference call, which you just never see. And it's probably a good call. But, I mean, I think if it wasn't called, you wouldn't have been like, oh, my God, how did they miss that? So 15 yards backs them up. Next play, Stewart hits like a 30-plus yard completion for a first down, and they're back in the red zone. And that was just like a gut punch for Kansas State.
Yeah, so this A&M drive, you have the offensive pass interference on first down, which, like you said, it was probably offensive pass interference, but wasn't egregious. Then the next play, 36 yards to Bumgarner, like you mentioned. They're at the 15-yard line now. Then Kansas State goes off sides, and all of a sudden now you have Texas A&M at the 10-yard line going in with 2:15 left.
And they finish, they cap off the drive with a nice slant, punch it in, touchdown, minute 5 left, the 2-point conversion. Run a nice pick play that wasn't, again, egregious. There was no, I mean, it's like a very nicely executed pick play, and they get the 2-point conversion. We're tied up. And at this point, Mike Stoops is the defensive coordinator, by the way. Same guy who, brother of Bob Stoops, took over Arizona for a little while. Like the shots of the press box of the defensive coaches there, those guys are furious at this point in the game.
Yeah, look, hey, they know the stakes. They know the stakes just like everyone at home does watching. And, Ben, one thing to mention is that Sirr Parker is the one who caught the touchdown, and he also caught the 2-point conversion. So this is where you see the legend of Sirr Parker in Texas A&M lore sort of start to take shape.
You love Sirr Parker.
I love it, dude. 2 R's, bro. Sirr with 2 R's.
2 R's. Kansas State, they get the ball back, another chance. Again, you got Automatica in your arsenal. Just got to get across midfield. It's a really weird finish. Kansas State gets the ball to midfield. There's like 12 seconds left. There was a 12 men on the field penalty, and help me remember this, because they were having a discussion. They actually marked off 15 yards on a 12 men on the field penalty. And then they had a debate over whether it should have been a 5-yard penalty versus a 15-yard penalty. I don't ever remember there being a 15-yard penalty for having 12 men on the field.
No, neither do I. And this took them a long time to sort of decipher what was going on here.
And this was the game, because 15 yards pretty much puts them in range.
Yeah, 15 yards. And I know we keep on mentioning this, but we have Gramatica here, sort of in the background, ready to come on and kick this game-winning field goal. But this penalty puts them almost in field goal range. Then we have another false start penalty on Kansas State, which takes them right out of field goal range.
Yeah, so many penalties for Kansas State this half. It was crazy. So they're gonna line up and try a 69-yarder, the legend of Gramatica, but they have a delay game. So then it moves them back and okay, I know we've kicked the 70, whatever you said, 73-yarder in practice, Mike, but the 74-yarder is not going to work. And plus, because of that delay game call, Gramatica actually kicked the ball, and it came up like 10 yards short. So it wasn't like he was close on that 69-yarder. And now they throw a Hail Mary, and holy cow, I forgot about this play. Bishop rolls around, throws the ball from his own 35, basically into the end zone. It gets kind of deflected. They catch the ball at the 1-yard line. They actually complete the pass down to the 1.
And that was you said the throw by Bishop.
Dude.
He is a howitzer, that guy. I didn't realize he had arm strength like that. I mean, we talked about how fast he threw the ball before, but that was a bomb. And like you said, they almost scored a touchdown there, which I completely forgot about, like you mentioned. So we're heading into overtime now, all right, after this close Hail Mary play. And to put numbers to how good Brandon Stewart, the quarterback, was for Texas A&M, to put numbers to it, 185 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a 2-point conversion in the fourth quarter alone.
Well, that's pretty much this whole game.
He was the difference.
Yeah,
he was the difference.
27-27, end of regulation. I don't know how Kansas State didn't close out that game, but here we are. A&M gets the ball first. Kansas State won the toss, took defense. They have to settle for a field goal. So again, Kansas State, all you got to do is get a touchdown to win this game. Go to the BCS National Championship. First play, reverse, goes for a first down. Second play, they get it down to the 6-yard line, Mike. It's second down now and 2 from the 6. All they need is a touchdown. They even point out a lot of weapons here for this Kansas State team here inside the 10. Well, baffling. I mean, just scratching your head with the way this thing played out. But Bishop, again, I don't know if we put the blame on him, but it's one of those where he kind of drops back and follows his running back and fullback and kind of his lead blockers and just kind of carries it, keeps it himself. But I don't know if he just decided to turn upfield too quickly, but he collides with his running back and loses 2 yards.
Brutal. That was a brutal play. This is like when you're watching a college football game and you see the first 2 plays from Kansas State, gets them down to the 6, and you're like, this is why I don't like college overtime, because it's going to be too easy for Kansas State to score and now go to the national championship game. And then this happens, and you're like, what the heck just happened?
Yeah.
And, the end result is they have to settle for a field goal. So now we head into the second overtime.
Well, let's talk about that field goal, Mike, because they get the loss of 2, then they get it down to 4th and 1. They get 3 yards on the next carry. It's 4th and 1. It might even be less than 1 yard. We didn't really get a good mark, but it looked like I think they had to get to the 4. It looked like he fell inside the 5. It's 4th and less than 1, and you've got Bishop, and you're playing for a chance to go to the national championship. I don't get how you settle for a field goal there. I don't get it.
Yeah, we differ on this, Ben.
Do you?
I don't know. Are you willing to put your whole season on the line?
It's less than a yard.
Yeah, no, I know, but Bill Snyder, that doesn't work. He's got to look everyone in the eye.
So you like the play call?
I do. Yeah, I would have done the same thing.
Fake news.
Yeah, we're on opposite ends of the spectrum here.
Maybe it's because I've been watching the new breed of football, and it's like, you go for it. Analytics tells you, Mike.
Yeah, analytics. Yeah, the guy sitting in the football offices who's never played football is telling you to go for it.
I mean, it just seems like a sneak. I mean, just a sneak gets you across this yard. But anyway, they give it to Gramatica. He makes the kick. They go to second overtime. Kansas State gets the ball first. Bishop in this drive goes over 100 yards rushing, and they point out Kansas State hadn't lost in 30 straight games when they had somebody rush over 100 yards. They again get inside the 10 and settle for a field goal. And I think that was the story for both teams is if one of these two teams would have executed better in the red zone, they would have won the game. Now, we know there's a winner already, but either one of these two teams performed better in the red zone, they win this game. And Kansas State just botched it again. But
yeah, it is a missed opportunity, another missed opportunity for them.
So now A&M, it's their advantage. It is an overtime. But crazy part is, it gets to 3rd and 17. They lose some yardage. They get a penalty. It's 3rd and 17. Kansas State again is in great position. Hey, because you're in this is that spot in play calling, Mike, and they kind of point this out on the broadcast. If we don't get this third down here, if we don't get anything on third down, we got a field goal. So the question is, do you try to get the first down and continue the drive, or do you try to get a few yards and just make it a more manageable field goal to tie it and send it to third overtime? And it seemed like they decided to go the latter. They threw this slant play that probably was intended to maybe get 8-10 yards, don't you think? But instead, it went to the house.
For sure. Look, this was not a great play call if you're trying to win the game, like you mentioned. This was to set up their field goal kicker to tie the game. And what ends up happening is absolutely jaw dropping. I remember in the moment watching it was jaw dropping, and it was when we went back and watched this. He hits Sirr Parker on a typical, slant play. A typical slant play with a receiver, like you said, make it 8-10 yards. But, he breaks a tackle, breaks into the open, and before you know it, Sirr Parker standing in the end zone. Not a great play call, but it worked. And everyone is absolutely shocked as Sirr Parker goes into the end zone, and Texas A&M wins the game, and no more national championship hopes for Kansas State.
And the other part of this, too, is he gets tackled at the 1 yard line. He gets pulled down, his knee hits, he's not in for a touchdown, but there's no review. And I know that, for all the hand-wringing we do over the length of reviews and how frustrating it is many times to watch this review process late in games, I don't know the outcome would have been any different, but if I'm Kansas State, I want an opportunity there to keep him out of the end zone.
Hey, you bring up a good point. That's never brought up, okay, as far as when people talk about this game. It's never brought up.
And it's clear.
It is clear. You're right. But like you said, there was no remedy for it.
So that was the ball game. It was over on that play. Really, really incredible finish here, and still very surprised that Kansas State didn't win this game, but a 36-33 final. Yeah, highlighted by that 15-0 fourth quarter by Kansas State in this game. Oh, by the way, let me back up because let's talk Jackaroo for a second. How about that walk-off interview with Bill Snyder?
So we have this shocking moment of Sirr Parker getting in the end zone. We have Jackaroo within probably 10 seconds of the game being over with a microphone right in Bill Snyder's face at center field at the 50-yard line.
Walking off the
right,
field.
Asking him like hard-hitting questions about the strategy at the end of the game.
Dude, crazy. It was crazy.
Dude, it was wild. I give Bill Snyder credit for keeping his composure.
Yeah, it was very uncomfortable for sure. And, it was tough to watch, but I credit Jack Root. Like, the guy was all over the field. Very aggressive reporter in this ball game.
Yeah, we complain about how vanilla all the reporters are these days, how they never want to say or do anything controversial because they don't want to end up on Twitter trending, right?
Yeah.
So if we're going to complain about that, we can't complain about Jack Root. I 100% agree with you.
So this is the first loss again for Kansas State, and propelled Florida State into the championship game to play Tennessee, and it was a kind of a brutal turn of events for Kansas State because they didn't receive a spot in what was the inaugural Bowl Championship Series, despite being ranked in the top 4, as well as being the highest-ranked non-champion from any conference. So they weren't invited to the Cotton Bowl Classic, as a conference runner-up typically would do for the Big 12, or to the Holiday Bowl. Which was actually supposed to be for the third-place team in the conference, Mike. Those two bowls chose Texas and Nebraska instead, and Kansas State ended up in the Alamo Bowl to play Purdue that year. They actually lost that game on a final drive by Purdue, an 80-yard drive that gave them a 37-34 victory.
Was that Drew Brees?
I
probably was.
Guessing so, yeah. But following that season, they actually created a new rule that's called the Kansas State rule, where the third-ranked team would always have an automatic bid to the BCS Bowl. So, man, what a awful, awful final couple of weeks for this Kansas State program.
Yeah, and let's put it – so I remember they went to the Alamo Bowl. Secondly, if you were a bowl and you had a choice whether to invite Texas, Nebraska, or Kansas State, and there was no rule, you wouldn't invite Kansas State either, right?
No, yeah.
If we're being fair. And you're right, that did change the rule. And what about the Holiday Bowl, huh?
Holiday
I love the Holiday Bowl.
Oh, always such a great game.
Played at Jack Murphy Stadium on like the natural grass at night. There's always like a high scoring game.
Dude,
the Holiday Bowl is great.
Beautiful, beautiful game. A&M would go on and they would play in the Sugar Bowl against Ohio State, who was number 3, and they dropped that game 24-14. So a very good Texas A&M season, a very good Kansas State season that they probably look back on in a lot of regret over the way that thing finished out. I think they had every opportunity to make the national championship and didn't, but that's the way it kind of played out. I don't know, they would have beaten Tennessee that year. Tennessee was really good, but Kansas State had the opportunity, Mike. But I think about the what ifs in this one, and the first thing I think about is two players in this game. What if we watched these older games in the 90s? And earlier, there's some players that stand out, and you're like, man, what if these guys played today? But Bishop's a guy that if he played like in an RPO system and just played a little more complicated offense, this guy, he'd put up some ridiculous numbers.
Yeah, because he's a true dual threat quarterback. Like he was just, in my opinion, he was just as good of a passer as he was a runner.
Yeah.
And if the offense had been built a little more around his skill set, like you said, it was a little more diverse in its scheme and stuff like that. Like you said, I think he could have even been a next level type of quarterback.
The other guy in this what if is like, what if A&M would have used Dante Hall differently? I look back on his numbers. He had 7 punt returns that year. Chris Taylor was their primary punt return guy.
Unreal. Could you imagine not having – that's like when Vince Carter wasn't explosive at North Carolina and he got into the pros and you're like, what is this?
Yeah.
That's like the football version of it. For those of you, you're going to go back and watch the game, hopefully, while we're going through this. But they were literally like, he was in like an I formation or whatever formation. They were handing the ball off to him. They never even threw the ball to him. They threw the ball to Sirr Parker.
I was going to say, he had 6 catches all year. He had 6 catches all year, and each one of those averaged 15 yards per catch. I don't know, like, if there was ever a guy that was mismanaged, it wasn't like this team was full of playmakers. And sure, the offenses were more conservative, right, back then. It's a different era of football. But is that guy, if he's not playing, if he's not returning punts this season, and he did return some kicks too, but they actually had Sirr Parker back there too, so he didn't return. He wasn't like the exclusive kickoff returner either. But if he returns kicks and he's just a little more involved in the offense, like the passing game, isn't that good for at least one more win this season? And who knows? All their games were close. That could have been the difference for them going undefeated.
Yeah, couldn't agree with you more. We're talking about Dante Hall, who's one of the most elusive NFL players I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Never mind in the Big 12.
Their losses, they had 14 points against Florida State and 14 points against Ohio State. They had the 24 points against Texas they lost. But, I mean, I just feel like if he's used a little bit better, this offense is going to score more, and who knows what happens that season. So I was a head-scratcher going back and watching it, how this guy wasn't used a little bit more, because he was a dynamic player. And he's, again, a guy that I think this day and age, if he's in an offense now, that guy's all over the field, and he's a matchup nightmare for so many teams out of the backfield, and also just, maybe out of the slot or something. Golly. It's crazy watching that again. Any other what ifs for you, Mike, from this game?
No, I think you about covered it. I don't have many other what ifs. Other than the what if, like you mentioned, of what would have happened if Kansas State gets in versus Tennessee. To be honest, Kansas State had a good season. They were a good team. I don't think they're at the level of Tennessee, though.
I also think that, what if, and I don't know that margin of victory matters, but what if it didn't? Does the play calling change there late in the game, and Kansas State able at least to run more clock off and potentially, if nothing else, just pin A&M back a little bit deeper? That was the game to me. I mean, that second down play call to throw the ball and then subsequent fumble. I mean, such an awful way to close out that game. Some outdated items. I'll start with this one and go, first off, neck rolls. Dude, it seemed like every guy, not necessarily the linebackers that stuck out, but like everybody's neck had the huge, like it was probably like 6 inches behind them, their shoulder pads.
Yep, neck rolls, cowboy collars, whatever you used to call them. Like that guy Swift, the tight end, perfect example.
Yeah.
It made him look like a behemoth.
Yep. How about the teams that were still in Division I AA at the time? They had the scroll going on, right? And they had Division I AA and Division II playoffs. UMass, App State, UConn were all still Division I AA.
Yep, the division is in this time of year, like you mentioned, it's Division I AA playoff time.
I don't think I realized UConn came along that late.
Yeah,
Division I.
UConn football. I mean, it still is nothing. But
yeah, but they were good early 2000s. I mean, like they entered quickly.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, they were competitive rather quickly.
Yeah,
fair point.
The other outdated I have, Mike, the clock stopped every time the ball went out of bounds, and it wasn't one of those where like it stopped and then once the ball was set, clock would keep going again. If somebody went out of bounds the ball, the clock was stopped until the next play started.
And we only notice this, everyone, because these games are really long. and when you look and see like, 3 hours, oh man. And then you find out like all the commercials are cut out and it's still 3 hours. No. You notice little things like Ben just mentioned.
But that's such a huge like time management now. I mean, you're talking like first quarter. If a guy runs out, it gets pushed out of bounds after a 2-yard gain, it's going to be a full. They're not starting the clock until they actually line up after the play clock winds down and they snap the ball. That clock is not running. That's obviously changed now once the ball's set and the head official weighs it in. The clock's running again, but unless we get under 2 minutes. But God, that drug the games out completely. What about outdated for you?
There was a Bobby Boucher mention from Waterboy. I forget what it was in reference to, but Bobby Boucher, another neck roll guy with the big pads.
Yep. And that was the year when it came out too, 98.
Yeah. And then they made a very quick Mark McGuire home run comment, which back then you pretty much had to, especially when you were in St. Louis. Yeah,
no question. All in all, a good game, Mike. And you watch these games and these teams that aren't always in these positions to win and go to big games. Like we had West Virginia recently in their backyard brawl loss, and then you have this game with Kansas State. And you look back and you're like, man, more frustrating because you had every chance to win those games and it just didn't happen.
These games were almost mirror images of each other from that perspective. I mean, this one was a little more high scoring. The other one kind of played in worse weather from what I remember, the West Virginia Pittsburgh game. This one, though, I looked at Kansas State as being a little bit of a better team maybe than West Virginia, but I also looked at Texas A&M being a lot better opponent than Pittsburgh. So, 6-1 half dozen of the other, but both just like games that when you have a program like West Virginia and a Kansas State that are not going to be in this position a lot, it just makes this stuff sting 10 times more to the fan bases, the players, the coaches, anyone associated with these programs.
Right. Well, let's close it out on that note. We appreciate you listening to the Distant Replay podcast. We're going to have this game up on our website, distantreplaypodcast.com. You can go back and watch it in its entirety. Connect with us on Twitter, Instagram, and every show is archived on YouTube as well. We have plenty more to come, more games, more minisodes in the hopper as well. So please hit subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. We would appreciate it.
Until next time.